Welcome to the Ranking Revolution podcast, your go-to source for strategies and ideas for SEO, organic growth, content creation, and online business. I'm your host, Doug Cunnington. Today, I'm going to chat with Barb Davids, and this is going to be a two-parter like many of the interviews that I do. And we're going to first start talking about analytics and analyzing data and maybe how you interpret it and help your clients do a better job taking action on it and just really sharing some of the results with your clients. In the second part, we're going to talk about the transition from being a corporate employee in a marketing department to running her own business. And she's actually a digital nomad, so we get into some of those details as well. And it's super interesting hearing someone from the corporate world. They have to figure out how they're going to be a solopreneur, which is what I've sort of adopted myself. So we get into all those details. And let's get to the interview with Barb right now. Barb Davids is a digital marketing coach and consultant with over 20 years in the digital marketing industry. She transitioned from running digital marketing departments in windowless offices to Mountain View offices, helping small business owners get more out of their digital marketing. Today, we're going to talk about analyzing and interpreting data from specifically the Google Search Console. And the thing is, sometimes data is misleading. So you have to go a few layers deeper to understand what's really going on. Then you need to understand what your goals are and what's driving business and revenue for you or your client. So Barb, welcome. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Doug. I am doing good. I'm looking at the mountain view, so it can't get any better, I don't think.
I love it. What mountains are you looking at? Where are you located?
I'm based in Las Vegas. I'm actually a digital nomad right now, but I came back here for a couple months and I'm in this place called Lake Las Vegas, which is kind of on the east side of the valley. And there's like literally a mountain right there. It's really cool. So
I love it. Yeah, I don't have mountain views from the basement studio down here, but if I go outside, I can see the front range of the Rocky Mountains, and it's awesome every day when I go out to walk the dog. Multiple times a day. It's just, there's something to it. Not everybody loves mountains. Maybe the ocean or water is the thing for other folks, but mountains really do it for me. And I'm glad you got out of the windowless corporate environment. So quick intro. What's your background? You've been doing some digital marketing stuff for years. Can you just briefly talk about how you transitioned from, it sounds like more of a corporate environment to a solo operator?
absolutely. So I was sitting in, windowless offices quite a bit for a long time, mostly in the furniture industry and doing digital marketing, running the digital marketing department. So it was overseeing like product stuff, overseeing Google ads, overseeing anybody that we hired in. It was usually just me. And then we would hire people in. For whatever reason, we didn't have like really large marketing departments in the furniture industry. And they were really kind of behind the times for a long, long time. So I was always fighting with, not literally, but figuratively fighting with a lot of the owners, trying to get them to buy into digital marketing. Like, this is what you need to do. But then, of course, as soon as something came along and they're like, oh, we got to do this because it's shiny. Like, and it was just very challenging the whole time, I think, trying to have to state what could work or what should work and trying to get buy-in all the time. And around the same time that I started doing photography for myself, I was in Las Vegas and doing fitness photography. I started meeting other photographers and trying to do SEO just for my photography. And I was getting confused, even being in the industry, like, what am I supposed to do as a photographer to get my website seen? And I thought, well, if it's confusing for me and I'm in the industry, how confusing could it be for photographers who don't know anything about digital marketing? So I started working with other photographers and just kind of networking and things like that. And about the same time, I started getting in my head, I don't want to work behind a desk anymore. I'm pretty done with this. I just wanted to be able to travel all over, work anytime, anywhere, so that I could be with family, friends, and still make an income. And so that kind of all snowballed into doing some work for some photographers. And then, really funny story, it's kind of maybe similar to some other people too, but I ended up transferring jobs to another job that would allow me to work from home so I'd have less drive time so I could spend more time on the business. Well, then I got fired from it. And the funny thing is I got fired for something I wasn't even responsible for. So I was like, okay, universe, I get what's happening. No problem. Here I go. So then I started my business and it's been it'll be 5 years in November. So
I want to dig just a little bit deeper before we get into the analytics stuff. You mentioned that it was a little challenging figuring out how to do the SEO for your photography website. Did you ever crack the nut there? What dots did you have to connect from your, your, I guess your old skills or the skills you had in a certain context versus doing SEO for a photography site?
I think what code I cracked is that I didn't have to follow all the advice that was out there. I think a lot of advice that's out there now, being in the industry, I can say this emphatically, is you don't need to do everything. You need to do what's right for what you're working on and whatever resources you have available or what your goal is. But I think a lot of times in the digital marketing industry, we overthink things and we get so convoluted in the details that you have to do this thing that way. And it doesn't have to be. Like, for example, let's say the page title, and it needs to be so many characters long. It has to be this, it has to be that. No, it doesn't. It just needs to resonate with the person who's looking at the search result the most. Now, yeah, it's great to put the title in there or the keyword in there. However, it doesn't need to be a certain specific way all the time. Like some people are going to totally yell at me for saying that, and I don't care, but it doesn't need to be the exact way. There's like 20,000 ways to do any one thing.
The other problem, and it's gotten worse, I think, as more creators are out there and there's more platforms to create on, but YouTube is where I spend a lot of time. And a product will come out or some strategy will become popular, and then more and more people talk about it. We're in an echo chamber a little bit. And then it seems like everyone's talking about this thing you have to do. And it turns out, it makes up like 1% of the results or something, or you could improve by 1%, which is not nothing. But it's like, should you be spending like 40% of your time trying to improve this 1%? And then if you stack that on like 4 or 5 things, and if your craft and your job should be like doing photography, and you're like wasting all this time trying to do digital marketing to get people to your website, and then you're wasting time on these things that like barely move the needle, it gets really frustrating. You don't know what to focus on. And everyone is talking about like this 1 or 2 things, which may or may not work at all. Do you have anything to add to that? No real question.
No, I fully agree on that.
Yeah. And I'm part of the problem. I mean, I'm publishing the videos I'm complaining about. But with that said, when we were going back and forth trying to come up with an idea, you had a very specific situation where you were working with your copywriter and you were trying to analyze some data from Google Search Console. So can you lay out the scenario? Because I think people run into this all the time, whether they realize it or not, and then we'll kind of unravel the whole thing. But what was this scenario?
Mm-hmm. I have a client and we were doing a content audit and we were taking a look at, in particular, a keyword that came up that had dropped in ranking or wasn't getting a lot. I can't remember the specific off the top of my head right now. But when we went to look at it, we're like, oh, this page could be looked at to see if we could do any better with it. And then when we went in to look at it, it was over the time span of, I think it was like 3 months, it was sporadically showing up on Google Search Console. And so when it does that, of course, when you look at it in its entirety, it looks like a certain number. But when you go in, let's say it was on page 1 or ranking position number 2, and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. Let's go see what the words are that it's coming up for. And then you go in there and you're like, oh, there's an orange dot. Oh, there's an orange dot. It's like, it's not even a consistent line across the top. So that was super interesting. And it also makes it difficult too if you're looking at a lot of keywords or a lot of pages and you kind of have to go in one by one to take a look and see if that's the case. Or at least I don't know of any other way to do it in mass, but that was the specific scenario that we ran into.
Okay. And I'm going to repeat it back just because we're talking about graphs. And I think, maybe if you want to, you can share some of the graphs or something similar on your website, and we'll link up to that so people can take a quick look to visualize exactly what we're talking about here. But essentially, we have a small data set, but we don't know it's a small data set because we see, oh, this certain keyword is ranking like 4.3, and you're thinking, great, we're going to go take a look at it. But really, it's only shown up like 5 times over the course of 3 months. and you can't draw any real conclusions because the data set is too small. Is that another way to look at it?
Yes. And actually, I'm going to step back a second to say we weren't in Google Search Console in the beginning, or it wasn't in there first. I had actually looked at it through Google Sheets. I used that Google Sheets analytics for Google Sheets, something like that, the extension. And I pulled it in that way so I could see it, and I could do a conditional formatting so I can see red, yellow, green based off of high, low kind of thing. So I could quickly see what's happening. And then that's when I found out about it. And then I went over to Google Search Console to see, oh, what's going on? And that's how I found out about it.
Okay. So when you first looked at the data, what's your initial impression from it before you went to go dig deeper? And then what did you discover when you actually went to Search Console?
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yes, exactly. So it looked like it was ranking very well. I think in this particular case, I think it was the up one, not the down one. But so when I went to go look for what keywords were actually showing up for that page, that's when I went into Google Search Console and just looked at the page. And that's when I saw the sporadicness of it. So I was like, oh, the number I was given wasn't even accurate. So I can't say that it was ranking whatever it was, position 2, something on first page, because it was just like, oh, it showed up one day and it didn't for the rest of the days. Oh, it showed up another day. It didn't for the other days. So that meant that we actually had to take a look at the content and see how we could do something different to make it show more consistently.
Okay. And perfect segue, although before we get there, are your clients in the analytics, and like would they stumble across this in general? You're not, or you're shaking your head.
Yeah, no. They no, they don't like analytics at all. They think it's fascinating when I bring the information to them. I think that's the other thing too. There's still a lot of agencies out there that will, quote, monitor stuff, or they'll send like a dashboard without any context. And I think that's very difficult to the business owner to know, okay, what are you doing? What's working? So when I bring this information, I don't give them like the stuff that I look at. I give them a dashboard. I'm like, okay, here we're ranking for this one, but just so you know, it's still sporadic and we're trying to get it. And I'm really transparent with that, saying, okay, we're trying to make it more consistent. So it shows up all the time at that page 1 level. But otherwise, if I didn't bring them the analytics, they totally wouldn't even probably go into any reporting.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, and it reminds me of like my earlier days. And the reason why I asked that is I was like, oh, maybe some clients would hop in. They're like, oh, wow, this looks really good. And they come to you and they're like, oh, we're doing something right, or we're doing something wrong. Let's take some action on it. But really, they don't have the right amount of information to draw a conclusion. Mm-hmm. And I was going to say, I remember exactly. I would go to Search Console and I would see like, oh, this query, it's showing up as like, it's ranking like 1.2, fantastic. And then I look at the number of impressions and I see it's like 14. So
right.
it was just being tested, and then no one went to it, and then it drops off the face of the earth for whatever, 3-4 months. But I didn't know that then until I started looking at the data. So that's one other way. Like if you're in Search Console, take a look at the number of impressions and you can see if you have like a real amount of data to make any evaluation from. So, okay. Well, back into your segue. What do you do with that data? So you're like, okay, how can we get it to consistently show up? So how did you coach this client?
Well, this client, I actually do the work for them. So I ended up working with their copywriter specifically, and we try to brainstorm different ways. We are actually in the process right now. This was actually a newer scenario. So we haven't talked about what exactly we're going to do. That's later this month. But we will sit and talk about, okay, what words can we include on the page that maybe we haven't, that might be helpful. We take a look at other things on the first page and sometimes even second page, just depending on maybe energy level, because that's a lot of pages to look through. But we take a look and see, okay, what do other pages have that maybe we don't? Or what do we have that they don't? And looking at like how many images are on there, like going through and specifically visually going through. And I know there's tools that do this. However, I am very much loving the idea that I can get a visual of the page itself, because that also tells me, okay, if it doesn't look credible, I'm probably not even going to care about that page, because nobody's going to, in their right mind, going to click from that or buy from that. Like it's not a true competitor in my mind if it's like a crappy spammy looking one. So, especially in this case too, it's a dental client. So I feel like very much so that depending on the topic, of course, it's going to be, they're going to need to really get attracted to that page before they're going to trust them with whatever information it is. So then we'll talk about it. And then the copywriter will rewrite stuff and then we'll put it up there and then we'll wait for an undetermined amount of time, whatever we feel like. And then we'll go from there.
Does that interval of time depend on the client or some other, like, what's the starting point? Like, what's your first suggestion?
Absolutely, at least 2 weeks. And it's going to, I try not to say it depends, but it does vary based off of what the changes are. So if I'm just doing page titles and descriptions, I'll wait at least 2 weeks for anything before I decide, okay, do I feel good about what has happened or hasn't happened? Do I need to wait later? However, there was on a podcast somewhere I was listening and somebody was talking about the Google Raters guidelines about some information that I hadn't heard before. And it was very eye-opening in terms of, okay, if I make a change today, it might not show up for like a year, maybe even 2 years. It all depends on where Google is in their whole, what do you want to call it? Their whole cycle, right? So they do a algorithm change all the time, and some of them are bigger than others. And what happens is they have those Google Rater quality guidelines, and those are real people. Some of them are going to websites and saying, okay, this meets the criteria, this doesn't meet the criteria. And then they take all of that information, they send it over to Google, and then Google decides whether or not maybe to do anything about it. And then they either put it in the next Google, the next algorithm update, or maybe it goes in the next one. There's no like set way. So depending on all of that, like how do you even know how long you would have to wait? So now I feel like I've kind of changed my stance a little bit. I think it has to be at least 2 weeks. However, for some of the bigger changes, I will wait because I have seen pages take off after doing nothing to them. When they publish, we don't do any updates. And then 2 years later, it all of a sudden just pops off with no changes. So it's almost like, okay, well, how much patience do I have? Do I want to try something else again, or do I just want to wait? So,
And just to set the stage, right now, we're like 1 week into a major Google update, March of 2024. So we're not going to talk about that too much because everything will be out of date in a couple weeks here probably. But Google updates are rolling out all the time. So like right now you say, like 2 weeks, but like we don't even know because like there's an update rolling out. We don't know what it's going to impact. This one is more systems than normal. So kind of volatile, which it's an impossible question to really know the answer to. Because like you said, it could be a couple weeks if there's an update going on. If there's no update going on, it could be a couple years. Who knows? So give it time is the idea. Let's see. We have another note here, and I'll just kind of set the stage and then you could talk about it a little bit. So you sent over some pre-show notes and then said, if you're getting a report that says traffic is up by 237%, ask yourself about the time frame, the channel, and is it generating leads or sales or whatever. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think it's a little deceiving sometimes when people just throw out reports and it has like say 237% increase, especially when you look at the hard numbers and then all of a sudden that is, I'm not going to do the math that fast, but if it's like 2 leads to 10 leads, okay, that might be a ton percentage, but in reality, that's just 2 to 10. And for most small businesses, not all of them, but for most of them, that's just not a lot. Like that's just a very minor amount. So I think it's important to look at the raw numbers, not just the percentage. And then also ensuring that you're really looking at whether or not you're going over last week, last month, last year. There was that whole time during 2021, 2022, everybody was like, oh, we're up so much. Yeah, yay. But 2020 had like 0 things. So it's kind of all relative to whatever you're looking at. And especially if you're a seasonal business, like that could make a difference. So I think it's important to really take a look at that. Also, just the time frame itself. I think when you have a longer window, you have a better picture than if you're just looking, say, at one day, because all of the numbers, no matter what you're looking at, Google Analytics, Google Search Console, everything fluctuates so much in most scenarios. So.
Perfect. And quick tip for content creators, you can create sensational headlines by going from, 2 leads to 8 or whatever, you have a great big percentage, and then you could make it look like a great headline out there. Kind of shocking. But the point is perfect here, especially with seasonality. You can remove some of the seasonality by looking year over year. So at least you're comparing like the correct month to the correct month versus like January and February to November and December, where for a lot of businesses, those are going to be like a lot more leads, a lot more sales if you're in a retail space.
I think we also have, as people doing the reporting for the clients or for other people, I think we have like a responsibility to be clear about that. I still have some people that I've worked with reporting, and they talk about a certain number over here, but I don't really give a shit about that number. I care about this number. And it's based off of whatever the goals are. So for example, like with Google Ads, if somebody says, oh, I have a really low cost per acquisition or I have a really high cost per acquisition, I technically don't care. That's their deal. That's how they manage it. That's fine. But what I care about is leads, the actual hard number of leads. So if that number is not going up, I don't really care personally as a person who's on the reporting reading side, how that works. Like, just go do what you got to do, but give me leads.
That's it for part 1. So please check out part 2 with Barb, where we talk about her transition from a corporate gig to a solopreneur and her coaching program. If you have a second and you dig the show, please make sure you're subscribed wherever you're consuming this. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you could leave a review. And make sure you leave comments over on the YouTube videos and share all this stuff with your friends. Really appreciate the support, and we'll catch you on the next episode.